All right. Get my pen. I hate this thing. Really? Okay. So the autonomic nervous system. I'm going to go back to that slide that we've talked about the last couple of times we've met. Remember, you divide the nervous system into central and peripheral, and then you divide the peripheral nervous system into a sensory division, that's bringing information in, and a motor division, taking your response back out, your decision, what you need to do. Your response side is then divided into a somatic nervous system and an autonomic nervous system. So we're going to focus on this today. Autonomic, you can just almost substitute the word automatic. Okay, it's what happens automatically. Somatic is voluntary. So we're talking about voluntary, we're talking about skeletal muscle. So anytime you make a conscious decision or a voluntary decision to move a skeletal muscle, that's somatic. And pretty much everything else is automatic or autonomic. We're going to then divide the autonomic into sympathetic and parasympathetic. This is your fight or flight. And this is your rest and digest. We're going to talk about that and how each organ responds to your sympathetic or parasympathetic innervation. All right, so your autonomic nervous system, these are the motor neurons, okay, output, that innervate smooth and cardiac muscle. Okay, because remember, smooth and cardiac muscle are what? Involuntary. Right. So these make small adjustments all the time to help ensure that we are maintaining homeostasis. Optimal homeostasis. Again, subconscious, automatic, involuntary. All right, the two differences, I just kind of talked about that, the two main differences between the somatic and the autonomic are the effectors, okay? The effector is the muscle or the tissue, be it a muscle or a gland, that responds to the stimulus, okay? So whatever is going to respond, that's the effector. So a skeletal muscle is an effector, that responds to a stimulus. Your pancreas is a gland. It responds to a stimulus. Your stomach is an organ. It responds to a stimulus. Anything in your body that responds to something is considered an effector. It either responds to a voluntary stimulus or an involuntary stimulus. Okay? Skeletal muscle, voluntary. Somatic, everything else, involuntary, autonomic. They also use different neurotransmitters. We know skeletal muscle uses which neurotransmitter? Which acetylcholine, right? So the somatic is acetylcholine. We know that is what stimulates skeletal muscle. And we'll talk about the ones that stimulate the other ones in just a second. And then there are some neurotransmitters. Let's just say neurotransmitter, NT. They'll actually bind to maybe two different types of receptors. The same neurotransmitter, but it may bind to receptor type 1 or receptor type 2. And in one case, if it binds to receptor type 1, it may cause a positive response. If it causes to receptor type 2, it may cause a negative response. So it depends on what kind of receptors on the target organ, how it responds to the neurotransmitter. And we'll talk about that as well. All right. Somatic, voluntary, skeletal. Autonomic, involuntary, cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, glands. And when I say glands, I'm talking about endocrine glands, and some exocrine glands. Do you remember anything about the difference between endocrine and exocrine? What's the example of an exocrine gland?
Sweat gland.
Sweat gland, yeah, exactly. You ever notice when you get nervous, you do what? You sweat. So there is some nervous component to sweating, right? It's not just about thermoregulation. When you get nervous, you tend to get sweaty, right? Glands, like endocrine glands, that's like your pancreas, your adrenal gland, anything that produces a what? What do endocrine glands produce? Hormones. All right. Another gland, for example, would be your lacrimal gland. What's your lacrimal gland make? Tears. And when you're sad, it responds. Your nervous system, when you're sad, what do? Cry. Okay, so so these glands will respond. That's an exocrine gland. It goes out through a duct. So again, your glands can be either endocrine or exocrine. Okay. The efferent pathways, the response pathways, the pathways going away from the central nervous system. So out, away from the brain and spinal cord, out to the organ that's going to respond. When you're talking about the somatic nervous system or the skeletal muscle, it's one neuron that goes all the way from the spinal cord to the muscle. When you talk about the autonomic nervous system, it requires 2 neurons. Okay? There is one neuron in the CNS, and then a second neuron that then extends to the organ. So it's a 2-chain pathway, and I've got a picture of that. We're going to review this on the picture. Remember, this is skeletal. Somatic nervous system, that's acetylcholine, okay? It always causes a muscle to contract. It always stimulates in the somatic nervous system. In the autonomic nervous system, the 2 main neurotransmitters are acetylcholine and norepinephrine, okay? And these can be either or, depending on the receptor type. So let's put this all together on a picture. This is figure 14 too. It's a great picture to kind of tie it all together for you. It divides it into somatic and autonomic. You'll see this is the central nervous system, okay? All this kind of tan is your central nervous system, brain and spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system, anything outside of that. This is a neurotransmitter. This is what it's going to respond, the effector organ, and then what's the effect. So here we go in the somatic. One axon releases acetylcholine, binds the skeletal muscle, causes it to contract. We know that. We've done it over and over and over again. All right. Autonomic. You divide it into either parasympathetic or sympathetic. And we're going to talk about the effects of each. In both cases, sympathetic and parasympathetic, you have the primary or the first chain neuron. So you have one. There's then a synapse on either another neuron or a gland, endocrine gland, or a neuron. And then this is always acetylcholine. That first synapse is always acetylcholine. Causes usually a stimulatory effect. Then the second neuron, or in this case an endocrine organ, releases a neurotransmitter. If it's sympathetic, it releases norepinephrine. If it's parasympathetic, it releases acetylcholine. So sympathetic, the second axon or second neuron or gland releases norepinephrine, and the parasympathetic, it releases acetylcholine. Here are your organs. These are all your autonomic or involuntary organs: heart, digestive system, stomach, pancreas, adrenal glands. And it can either be positive or negative, depending on what the organ is and what type of receptor we have.
So why are the second axons?
These are usually very, very close. It's usually a short distance, so you don't have to. You myelinate something so that it can travel a long distance at a great speed. Okay, and so this is usually really close. It doesn't need. They're really short. Okay, and I've got another picture that'll show you that. In the case of an endocrine organ, the hormones go right into the bloodstream. Okay, and again, these are usually not too long. The other thing about that, to kind of clarify, your somatic nervous system is really fast. I mean, think about how quickly skeletal muscle responds. I mean, when I move, I mean, it's instantaneous, okay? Sometimes the autonomic is a little bit slower. These are, the autonomic nervous system is helping you control homeostasis, regulating blood pressure, heart rate, sugar levels, things like that. So they're not necessarily instantaneous, okay? They're a little bit slower because homeostasis is just a constant up and down to try to keep things balanced. So you don't just go, increase your heart rate, decrease your heart rate, increase your heart rate, decrease your heart rate. So it's just a little bit of a seesaw. So it's not quite as quick or quite as fast as skeletal muscle. So you don't have to have that mild, and it's not as fast as a process. Make sense? Indeed. All right.
I'll tell you what doesn't make sense to me. Fight or flight, and acetylcholine as a neurotransmitter is more of an energy kind of thing, right? So why is the sympathetic system using norepinephrine or maybe I don't know.
You will. Hang on.
It seems like the sympathetic would use acetylcholine.
But what's the other word for epinephrine? Adrenaline.
Duh.
Now does it make sense?
Yeah, it does.
All right, there you go. He answered his own question. All right, so when we talk about the autonomic nervous system, let's break it down. Let's talk about sympathetic and parasympathetic. Fight or flight is how we usually describe sympathetic. It's the accelerator. It tends to speed up or increase whatever it's affecting. Increase heart rate, increase blood pressure, increase respiration rate. It usually has a stimulatory effect. Parasympathetic is our rest and digest. It tends to slow things down. It's the brake. It tends to bring things back down. Just in a normal, hanging out, not doing much, you are usually in parasympathetics in control. It's kind of what you are normally in. It's kind of the primary nervous system that's working. Now, just about every organ, there's a few exceptions, all right, are served or innervated by both sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves, okay? Because you can increase heart rate, you can decrease heart rate, right? So you've got both positive and negative effects. But again, if an organ has both sympathetic and parasympathetic, they are going to cause opposite effects. One's going to increase it, one's going to decrease it. And we're going to talk about different organs and their effects. Now, like I said, parasympathetic is basically what we're in all the time. Okay, that's kind of our go-to nervous system. It basically helps us maintain our activities and conserve our body energy. We're just kind of, until we need to ramp it up, we're just kind of chilling and kind of storing up what we need, okay? If you're hanging out, relaxing, reading, after a meal, your parasympathetic nervous system is in control. It keeps your blood pressure low, keeps your heart rate steady, keeps your respiration low, okay? Because you don't need to be reading a book, right? You just want to be reading a book, okay? But depends on what the book is exactly. But it does positively stimulate gastrointestinal activity. I said rest and digest, right? So when we have just eaten a meal, we want to go kick back on the couch, unbutton our top button, and rest, and have all that blood shunted to our gut to digest that food. So we want to ramp up our digestive activity. Okay, so think about a cow. They go eat, and then what do? They go lay down. All right, and they chew their cud and digest their food. We do the same thing after a Thanksgiving meal. Okay, you just kind of go chill. So you're ramping up your gastrointestinal so it can do its job, and everything else is kind of taking a break. All right. When you are in parasympathetic mode, your pupils are constricted. Okay, so they're small. All right, you don't need a lot of light. You're chilling. You kind of just want to, kick back. Now think about the opposite. I'm going to talk about it. In sympathetic, your pupils dilate. What happens when your pupils dilate? What does that allow to happen? Do you know? More light. That makes you have more acute vision. Okay? So sympathetic is that fight or flight. So if you're trying to get away, you want to be able to see well, right? So you want to open up your pupils, get a lot of light, and have acute vision. All right. Sympathetic. This mobilizes our body when we need activity, okay, the fight or flight. It helps us promote, we use it when we're doing exercise, when we feel threatened. What we will do is shunt blood from the digestive system, okay, to the skeletal muscles so that they can work for us and do their job. We will dilate the bronchioles. You remember that from Unit 1? What are bronchioles? Where are bronchioles? Lungs. Why would you want to dilate the bronchioles? Open up that airspace. Bring in more air. Bring in more oxygen. We need oxygen to do what? Make ATP. What's ATP needed for? Run those muscles. Okay, so you need more oxygen. You're going to release glucose from your liver. You need glucose to make what?
ATP.
ATP, so you can get away. All right, so you're going to do these things to make yourself more effective to escape a situation or, again, if you're ramping up your activity like in exercise. All right, this is a schematic of the parasympathetic innervation and the sympathetic innervation. You'll notice that most of the parasympathetic innervation comes from 3 of the, which nerves? Cranial nerves, exactly. So your oculomotor, your glossopharyngeal, and your vagus are all parasympathetic nerves, okay? You have 2 more parasympathetic nerves that are 2 of your sacral nerves. They're also parasympathetic. So this is your whole rest and digest side. Mostly is a parasympathetic, mostly cranial nerve innervation. Your sympathetic is all spinal nerve. Okay? You'll see here those 2 axons. You've got that number 1, number 2. Number 1, number 2. Number 1, number 2. See how much shorter the number 2 one is? Just, relatively speaking. All right? And then in sympathetic, number 1, number 2. It's a little bit longer, but if you'll notice on sympathetic, some of them have a little bit of myelin. But a lot of these are not really that long compared to skeletal muscle neurons. All right, so oculomotor. Let's see if you guys remember this from lab. It's parasympathetic innervation of the eye. Okay, so we know is it a sensory neuron or a motor neuron? Motor, because it tells you it's motor. All right. Do you remember which motor it was? 5.0. 5.0. Which, do you remember which test I said you could do for oculomotor? Okay, this is the one that had to do with pupils. When you shine the light and see the pupils actually change shape. So this is that pupil constriction and pupil dilation. So oculomotor, your pupils are, if you're parasympathetic, they are what? Constricted. Okay, so that's that innervation. Glossopharyngeal. Okay, glosso means tongue and pharyngeal pharynx. It also innervates the salivary glands. It's positive on the salivary glands. If you're resting and digesting, what are you doing? Making a lot of spit, right? Because you're eating. When you eat, you typically make saliva, right? And when you're resting, you make a lot of saliva. Let's look over here at sympathetic. Sympathetic also innervates the salivary glands. But when you're nervous or scared, what do you get? Dry mouth. So it inhibits the salivary glands. All right, you have sympathetic innervation to the eye. So whereas the oculomotor causes the pupils to constrict, on the sympathetic side, the pupils will dilate. All right, so we're going to do these back and forth in just a second. But just look, I want you to know that parasympathetic is, there's 3 cranial nerves that innervate the parasympathetic plus 2 spinal. Sympathetic is all spinal. Now remember, I told you to circle, star, underline, highlight, which one? The vagus nerve. Number what? Number 10. All right? You'll see it's the one that innervates all the stuff below the level of the neck. Remember, it's the one that sends all the parasympathetic information below the level of the neck. It goes to all the organs. Okay? So it's very, very important. You're going to talk about it a lot in 202. Because you're going to talk about cardiovascular, you're going to talk about respiration, You're going to talk about digestion. All that's coming in your next semester. Okay. When we talk about those first neurons and second neurons, okay, if it releases acetylcholine, we call that axon or that neuron a cholinergic fiber. Acetylcholine, cholinergic, that's what type of fiber it is. Okay? If it is a neuron that releases norepinephrine, we call that adrenergic. Why? Adrenaline. Okay? So if you have a cholinergic fiber or an adrenergic fiber, cholinergics release acetylcholine. Okay? That's all those first sets of axons and all your parasympathetic axons. Your adrenergic or norepinephrine releasing neurons are all your sympathetic, the second ones, axons. Now there's a couple of exceptions. I'm not going to ask you to remember the exceptions. It's not going to be in your test, but there's always an exception to every rule. So I threw it in here just so you know that there are exceptions, but you don't have to memorize that. Okay, so this is just review. Got that number 1, number 2. You'll notice all the primary, all the first order neurons release acetylcholine. If it's sympathetic, it releases norepinephrine. If it's parasympathetic, it's acetylcholine. So these are adrenergic. And then all of these are cholinergic. Cholinergic. So if you're going into the medical field and if you take pharmacology, you'll hear of some anticholinergics. There are drugs that are anticholinergic. So what do you think that means? They do what? They block these. At some point, they're going to block whatever cholinergic fibers we have. Okay? We have anti-adrenergics. So they're going to work at this end. So a lot of these drugs are designed, and so if you hear these terms, now you'll know what they mean. If it's an anticholinergic or an anti-adrenergic, you'll know what they're talking about. Okay. When we talk about these cholinergic neurons, okay, on the other side, they've got to have a receptor. Okay, so this cholinergic fiber is releasing acetylcholine. So that means the receptor on this side must be an acetylcholine receptor. So that means it's a cholinergic receptor. That makes sense? So if you have this first, if you have the second neuron and it's releasing norepinephrine, then whatever it is, whatever organ is going to respond to that norepinephrine has to have norepinephrine receptors, and they can either be type 1 or type 2, alpha or beta. So let's go back to cholinergic. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. So cholinergic receptors, you have 2 types. They're called nicotinic or muscarinic. Just so you can type, there's type 1 and type 2, and they're called nicotinic and muscarinic. And that comes from the word nicotine and muscarine. Those are 2 chemicals that bind preferentially to those receptors. They were named based on their preferential binding of those receptors. Nicotinic reminds you of nicotine, yeah, so smoking, yeah, so that's the same chemical. Nicotine, when it binds to a cholinergic receptor, is always stimulatory. Muscarine, when it binds, or when a muscarinic receptor is bound, it can be stimulatory or inhibitory. More inhibitory than stimulatory, but it can be both. So nicotinic's always stimulatory, muscarinic can be both, usually inhibitory. Adrenergic, they can be either alpha or beta. So you may have an alpha one or a beta one. Alpha ones tend to, let's just say they constrict vessels, and beta ones tend to dilate vessels. Let's see, what was I going to say something here. What was I going to say? Oh, beta blockers. You've heard beta blockers, right? Okay, so let's think about what a beta blocker is. All right, so let's talk about a blood vessel. Okay, so if you have norepinephrine binding an alpha receptor, okay, so this is the organ, so here's your alpha receptor. If norepinephrine binds the alpha receptor, the blood vessel will constrict, okay, and the pupils will dilate. If the norepinephrine binds a beta receptor, the vessel will dilate and the heart rate will increase. So let's think, why would you want to take a beta blocker? Let's think, to keep your heart rate down, exactly, and lower your blood pressure. So if you tend to have high heart rate and high blood pressure, you'll take a beta blocker to take this out, okay, so that then your heart rate will go up and your vessels will remain at tone and your blood pressure will come down. So that's what a beta blocker does. That's why if you take a beta blocker, you may feel real lethargic and tired because it's lowering your blood pressure and making you feel tired. Well, I've got it on there. I knew I had it somewhere. There you go, beta blockers. All right. Another one that you may see if you wind up going into anesthesiology, okay, or surgery, especially anesthesiology, is a lot of times they give atropine. And atropine is an anticholinergic. It blocks the muscarinic receptors, and its main thing is to prevent the formation of saliva during surgery. And why would you want to do that? So you want to aspirate, yeah. So you don't want them to have a lot of spit and aspirate or drown. Some of our cold medicines are adrenergic receptors, or stimulate adrenergics, so they're not anti-adrenergics. They're usually pro or something. What are these? What's the other word? There's another word they use. Can't think. I should have wrote it down. I can't remember what it's called. I think pro-adrenergics. I think that's what they're called. Pro-adrenergics. And a lot of the cold medicines that you take that are that stimulate those alpha adrenergic receptors, they decrease your mucus production. So these are drugs that work on the receptor side of an organ. So here's your organ. We'll make that an organ. And they work by either inhibiting, stimulating, or inhibiting on these receptor sides. Let's see. What else was I was going to say? I had something else I was going to say. It'll come to me. Just lost it. I was thinking ahead. Let me go back to see if I can remember what I was going to say. It'll come to me. I'll remember. All right. Obviously, if I don't remember it, it's not going to be in your test. Okay. How do these two relate? How do the sympathetic and parasympathetic relate? So what I want to do is we're going to have let me flip forward just a second. Hang on. This is not in your book. The only place that you can find it is in your PowerPoint. So, but I want you to, as we're thinking about, as you're studying this, I basically want you to really kind of learn this picture, and we'll come back to it. But it's at the end of your PowerPoints. If you don't have your PowerPoints, it's not in your book. You need to go to the PowerPoints and get this particular picture. Now let me go back. Okay. So when we talk about organs, they are innervated by both parasympathetic and sympathetic. Sympathetic is anything that will either increase heart rate, increase respiration, inhibit digestion, and inhibit elimination, okay? Because if you want to get away from something, you want to be able to run fast, you don't want to be worrying about digesting your food, and you don't want to have to stop and go to the bathroom, okay? So you want to do whatever it takes to get away. Parasympathetic is anything that's going to decrease heart rate, decrease respiration rate, allow you to digest, and discard wastes, okay? So those are your main goals of sympathetic and parasympathetic. Now, I told you that parasympathetic is kind of your in-control nervous system, with one exception. The sympathetic nervous system controls blood pressure, even at rest. Okay? It is in control of blood pressure. That's because sympathetic innervation, it's called sympathetic tone or vasomotor tone, causes vasoconstriction. All right? So if you have a blood vessel and it had no sympathetic tone whatsoever, it would be big and dilated. Well, that's not even bigger. It'll be dilated, okay? Sympathetic tone comes in and keeps the vessel slightly constricted, okay? Slightly constricted. And allows you to keep your blood pressure. It kind of helps you regulate your blood pressure. So think about a hose. So if you have a hose and water's coming out, and it's just kind of coming out the end, and you don't have the pressure real high, how can you make the water shoot further? Put your thumb over it, restrict the size of the opening, and it'll increase the pressure, right? So what you're doing with sympathetic tone is basically constricting the blood vessel, increasing the pressure. Now, if you need to get the pressure higher, you'll send more sympathetic innervation to the vessel and constrict it more, okay? But you always want to keep those vessels slightly constricted. So your sympathetic nervous system is always in control, keeping all your vessels slightly constricted to keep that pressure up, okay? So that's the exception to your parasympathetic nervous system is usually in control. All right. So parasympathetic normally dominates your heart, any kind of smooth muscle, urinary, digestive. It's always in control. It's your normal activity level. Okay. Now, when you are stressed, when you are, fearful, or you need exercise is a form of stress. I believe that, don't you? Stresses me out when I exercise. All right, so exercise, anytime you need to be in a stressful period, your sympathetic division will override it. Okay, it just takes over. It comes in and overrides the parasympathetic. And you can just, you can take that out. All right. Now, sometimes sympathetic and parasympathetic work together at the same time. They cooperate. And they both cause an effect. They're working together. So, example, when they don't work together or they cause an opposite effect, it's the heart. Sympathetic causes the heart rate to go up. Parasympathetic causes the heart rate to go down. Okay? Sometimes they work together and they both have a stimulatory effect. So this is not when they're working together to cause the same thing. The main one where you see them work together is during sex. Okay? This is when both parasympathetic and sympathetic work together to cause arousal and ejaculation. You can't have one without the other. They both have to be in place. So your parasympathetic fibers cause vasodilation, okay? When there's vasodilation in the penis, more blood goes into the penis, and that causes the erection. So erections are due to parasympathetic innervation. In order to get ejaculation, you have to have sympathetic fibers, okay? Excitatory fibers. That causes ejaculation. So you have to have both of those working at the same time. If you don't have both parasympathetic and get vasodilation and erection, and then followed by sympathetic innervation causing ejaculation, then nothing's going to happen. Okay? You got to have both of them working together. But that's very rarely do they work at the same time on the same organ. Usually they work in opposite directions. All right. Some more detailed information on sympathetic. When you think of sympathetic, think of norepinephrine and epinephrine or adrenaline, noradrenaline. Think of anything that's going to get you revved up. One of the organs that the sympathetic nervous system innervates is called the adrenal medulla. And this is an endocrine organ, your adrenal gland. And the adrenal gland makes adrenaline. Okay? So if you need to get away from something, your nervous system doesn't necessarily have enough adrenaline in those axon terminals to cause enough of an effect to really allow you to escape from whatever's chasing you, Doberman pincer, whatever. All right? You need more norepinephrine. You need more stimulation. So what the sympathetic nervous system does is it stimulates the adrenal gland. The adrenal gland releases more adrenaline, more epinephrine. And that more epinephrine is then more stimulatory and causes you to be able to have higher heart rate, higher respiration rate, and get away even faster. So it kind of helps itself out. We have like a secondary adrenaline rush. Okay, so you have a little bit of adrenaline in your nervous system, and when it needs more, it actually gets more from an endocrine organ, which is kind of cool. So it can ramp up the response. So that adrenaline rush is actually when your nervous system tells your adrenal gland, hey, I need more, and I need to be ramped up. All right. Other times besides fight or flight that you see, besides fight or flight, is in response to heat. Okay? But if you're hot, that's a stressful situation, right? I mean, you're putting your body under duress, under stress. And so thermoregulation is a response to heat or stress. Okay? It plays a role in the release of renin, and renin is a chemical which basically leads to the increase in blood pressure. Okay? It helps regulate blood pressure. Let's see what else. Sympathetic innervation will also cause the liver to release glucose. Why would you want to release glucose when you're stressed? Energy. Okay? And it also causes you to mobilize fat so that you can use fats for fuel, because we can also convert fats to energy. So anything that will allow you to use more energy is sympathetic. Okay. I want you to just think of this real basic. Your limbic system, that's where you have emotion. Okay? All right. When you're in a fight or flight or stressful situation, are you emotional? Yeah. So there is an emotional component to sympathetic innervation. Okay? If my body is just sitting here and a dog runs up and it's growling at me and I don't recognize that and I'm not fearful of that, my sympathetic nervous system's not going to do what? It's not going to kick in. Okay? So for you to fight or flight, you have to have some kind of emotional response to something, a fearful or, whatever response, in order for the sympathetic nervous system to kick in. All right, does that make sense? Except for cases of like thermoregulation. I mean, if you're just hot, you're hot. But if you need to, actually fight or flight, that real strong sympathetic response, there has to be kind of an emotional component. So something has triggered that sympathetic response. And usually it's fear or rage or something like that. Or nerves, you're scared. We'll figure out fear and scare us, same thing. All right, so anyway, so usually for you to have any kind of a strong sympathetic fight or flight response requires some kind of emotion. Now, that doesn't mean to say that your sympathetic doesn't work anyway. I mean, like I said, it's helping you thermoregulate. It's helping you balance your blood pressure. It's always working, but to have that really strong adrenaline rush, you've got to have some kind of emotional response to something. All right. Let's see. I want to say. What did I call the hypothalamus? Do anybody remember what I called it in lab? That was the thalamus. Brain's chemist. Okay, so it also plays a role in regulating sympathetic and parasympathetic control. It's monitoring oxygen levels, glucose levels, pH levels. It's keeping up with all that. Okay, and if changes need to be made, if you need to increase your heart rate or increase your respiration rate or increase your insulin levels or whatever needs to be done, the hypothalamus is monitoring that and sending out signals to either increase or decrease sympathetic or parasympathetic control. So the hypothalamus will help to control sympathetic and parasympathetic, will innervate or send signals to sympathetic and parasympathetic neurons in response to changing heart activity, changing blood pressure, body temperature, water balance, emotion, biological drives, reactions to fear. It plays a role. So it's kind of the main homeostatic component of the brain. So it's basically up there monitoring everything, and when it sees a change needs to be made, it then sends a signal to the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system to do their thing. Okay? All right, so let's just kind of go through a couple of these organs, and there will be a question on the test. And basically, it'll say something like, you know, you're being chased by a tiger, okay? I haven't made the question yet, but something like that. You're being chased by a tiger, all right? What would you expect to happen to the eye? What would you expect to happen to the lungs? And it will say increase the respiration rate, decrease respiration rate, constrict the pupils, dilate the pupils. Okay, I want you to think about what's going to happen to these organs under a stressful or non-stressful situation. Okay? So let's just kind of go through a few. So here's your eye. So we've just had a meal. So this is meal. You're chilling out after Thanksgiving. This is tiger. Okay? You got to get away. So if you're just chilling out, you've just had a meal, your parasympathetic's in control, your pupils are constricted, you're just kind of chilling, trying to fall asleep, you don't want a lot of light in there, you want to be able to chill out, right? If you see a tiger, okay, your sympathetic nervous system kicks in. You got to be able to see where you're going. You're scared. You know what happens when you're wide-eyed. You know what I'm talking about. When somebody's scared, what do? They have those big wide eyes. Their pupils dilate. So sympathetic, pupils dilate. All right? You've just eaten. Parasympathetic's in control. You're making lots of saliva. Now you're nervous. You're scared. You get that dry mouth. You inhibit salivation. You're chilling out, you're trying to go to sleep, you're resting, you want to slow your heart rate down. You want to be like in yoga position. Okay, so parasympathetic, rest and digest, inhibits the heart, slows the heart down. Here comes the tiger. You need to get more blood to your muscles. You need to pump faster. You need to accelerate the heart, right? You're chilling, you're just eating a meal, you're trying to sleep, you're trying to slow your breathing down, you're in yoga position. You just constrict your bronchioles and slowly breathe. Here comes that tiger. You need to breathe. Get lots of air in. Breathe big, breathe big. Relax those bronchioles. Open them up. Open the air passageways. You can breathe. You've just eaten a meal. You want to stimulate your stomach. You want your stomach to churn. You want to release those stomach acids. You want to stimulate the digestive activity. Here comes the tiger. You need every bit of energy that you can take away from your digestive system and put it into your muscles. So you inhibit everything. Blood flow goes away, everything goes away, shut down the digestive system, put all your energy into your muscles, inhibit the digestive system. Yeah, why don't we just get rid of that tiger? Let's just shoot the tiger. All right? You've eaten a meal. You may know what your gallbladder does?
Yeah, it just hangs out.
Just hangs out. Yeah, it makes bile, and bile basically breaks down fat. So if you just had a big old fatty meal, you need your gallbladder to kick in to release bile and help you break down the fat. So if you're in rest and digest, you're going to stimulate the gallbladder. If you're in fight the tiger, liver and gallbladder the gallbladder will slow down. Now, in sympathetic, you'll notice you need more energy. So it will cause the liver to release more energy. Here's that fight or flight again. Here's that. In fight or flight, you need more adrenaline, more noradrenaline. So during a sympathetic innervation or sympathetic response, you will get more adrenaline from the kidney and the adrenal gland. It'll make your body make more adrenaline, so that you'll have an even bigger fight or flight reaction. So just like I said, go through these and just kind of think about what's going to happen to, you know, these main organ systems in either after a meal or in response to some kind of scary stimulus. Okay? Any questions?